Hello everybody and welcome back to another 2022 Overwatch League roster breakdown video. Today we are taking a look at the roster for the Florida Mayhem. Pretty disappointing 2021 season for them, considering they were one of the top teams in 2020, but in 2021 they finished with a record of 5-11 and a -12 differential. They had a very strong May Melee, winning 3 out of the 4 games in that tournament, making it to Hawaii. And then they did not do well the rest of the season. They went pretty long time without winning a game. They won their first match in the June Joust, and they didn't win again until the Countdown Cup. So not a great season for them. Overall, one of the weaker teams. And that is, of course, why we saw them make some major changes. Basically, well, not basically, blowing up their roster for 2022 and going in a very different direction than what they had gone previously. And so if we pull up their roster for 2022, you can see it here. DPS line, they have Checkmate, Mirror, and Hydron. Checkmate, the only player who was on this team last season who is still with the team. In the support line, they have Surmajed and Animo. And in the tank line, they have Adam and Someone. Someone is currently only 17, but he turns 18 on April 24th, so they don't have to worry about him not being able to play, because he'll be 18 by the time the season actually kicks off. I think this is a very interesting roster, and I think it's one of the rosters that has me most intrigued, just based on who they have. So let's jump in, let's talk about each of their players and my thoughts on them, and how I think this Florida Mayhem roster is going to do. So starting with the DPS, of course, the first one we have, as I mentioned before, is Checkmate. The majority of the Checkmate playtime we saw in 2021 was him playing main tank. Him staying on this team feels a lot like Krillin staying on the Spitfire back in 2019 to 2020. Like, he didn't really play that much in 2019, but they are the ones who are keeping him around. He was the only player that they kept. That's the same thing with Checkmate. We didn't really see a lot of Checkmate. And when we did, it was not really him playing his main role, so who knows what you can make out of that. But Checkmate, of course, is a flex DPS player, so the expectation is for this team, he will be playing the flex DPS heroes, your Genjis, your Hanzos, stuff like that. He also, though, plays like Tracer and Reaper, so that'll be interesting to see what happens there. Mirror is the other flex DPS player for this team. He has, he plays stuff like Doomfist, Torbjorn, also plays stuff like Genji, and Echo is also really good Zarya, known for that. So I think Checkmate will be the primary flex DPS player. I've never really felt like Mirror was an elite level player. I thought his Zarya was always pretty good. That's definitely where I thought he looked the best at any given time, but beyond that, I've never really been his biggest supporter, and just not like he's bad, but I've never felt like he was an exceptional player. I always felt like he was one of the weaker parts of that Gladiators roster, so I think he provides a lot of flexibility for this team. I think that's one of the reasons why he's here, is because he can kind of fill in for when they need him. But I expect Checkmate to be the player that gets the majority of the playtime at the flex support role, or flex DPS role. Could be wrong, but that's really my primary guess. The main DPS player on this team that I am excited to see play, however, is Hydron. He is the hit scan player for this team. He plays Widow and Ashe and Cassidy, even plays some Tracer, plays some Hanzo. He is a very good player, of course. He is one of the American Tornado guys. And then, of course, he was with Redbird Esports. But he was with the American Tornado roster. And that's really where these guys are known for coming from. So we've talked about, obviously, Hydron already. Aspire was on the American Tornado roster before he joined the Toronto Defiant last year. And then we have players like OG and Ultraviolet, who we've already talked about, and Reiner. So a lot of these guys come from this one really good American Tornado roster and contenders that dissolved and kind of went their separate ways. We're all basically joining the Overwatch League. And Hydron is an incredibly talented hitscan player, right? So he played alongside Aspire in a sense. But the only thing that really kept Hydron out of the league, last season was just that he was too young. He's a very good player, really talented. Because he is the only hitscan player in this roster, I expect the Tracer play to primarily not be him, because usually you would expect Tracer to be paired with, an Ashe or a Widow. So in that situation, it would probably be Checkmate, who's playing the Tracer. But if it's like a Tracer Genji, something like that, Hydron will probably be the one pulling out the Tracer. He's probably the best Tracer on this roster, so that is a potential issue, depending on how good Checkmate's play is. But we'll see. But Hydron, to me, definitely the star of this DPS line, the player I'm most excited for. He is going to be the player that this team is built around on the DPS line. He is very, very good, very, very talented. He is the player who I expect to be the primary focus of this roster as they go forward. I think he is the player that will do the most, and he is the player who will be expected to do the most because he is just that talented and that good of a player. So the majority of this DPS lineup, right, like Checkmate Mirror, I'm pretty meh on, pretty average on. I don't really think Checkmate or Mirror are exceptional players, but I do think Hydron is, and I think Hydron is a very, very, very strong player and a potential Rookie of the Year candidate, depending on how well he plays. I think a lot of that also comes down to what happens with this roster as a whole and kind of how they work together. But I do really, really, really like Hydron, and I think that he provides a lot to this roster, and he is going to be the main focus of the kind of damage dealing side. Who pairs with him, I think, will just depend on the meta, but I don't think we're going to see Checkmate and Mirror together in the lineup at any point in time, because I think that Hydron is just too talented for that, and I think you're kind of throwing, in a sense, if you do that. So that is my take. I think Hydron's going to be the main guy for this team in a lot of cases, much like Yaki was in the past. I think it'll be Hydron going forward. Next, let's move to the support line. They have two players. They have Surmajed, who is the flex support player, and they have Animo, who is their main support player. I am surprised Animo was the player that they signed. Also, makes me sad that he is the only 2018 NYXL player left in the league, because Jonak retired, so Animo's the only one left from that original NYXL roster. Twilight's the only one left from that original Vancouver Titans roster. We're watching it slowly go away. The legendary rosters, they're all going their own separate ways. Anyway, Animo I think is an interesting signing. I'm actually surprised as to who they signed. They only have two supports. They don't have double flex support or anything like that. I'm concerned that they only have two support players. I don't really think, like, I'm a big Animo fan. I think historically Animo has been one of the top main supports in league history, and I think that people who say otherwise are just wrong. Like, I think Animo is better historically than someone like IDK has been. Animo does one thing very, very well. He stays alive and he heals your team. And for main support, that's really what you want. That is his kind of claim to fame. That's what he's done a lot. He's kind of passive, and that may be something you don't want going into Overwatch 2. But he can play the Break, he can play the Batiste, and he can play the Mercy, and he can play the Lucio. So you have really the four heroes that you most need out of your primary flex support player. So he does have those at his disposal. They're not his best. His Batiste and his Brig are not his best heroes, but they're serviceable to the point where I feel like Animo can be fine on this roster. Surmajed is really the player on the support line that I'm most interested in watching. He is a player coming out of Contenders, played primarily in EU Contenders. He is originally from Saudi Arabia, so that's where he comes from, so that's why he spent a lot of time in EU Contenders. Played for Angry Titans, played for Dubai Sandstorm, Raspberry Racers, Falcons Esport, which Falcons Esport was a very, very, very good roster when he was on the team. They had a very good run. They won, I believe they won European contenders at one point. I don't remember exactly. Maybe I'm wrong. But I thought they won at some point, but maybe I'm misremembering that. Maybe it was Dubai Sandstorm that won. One of the teams there was, I think it was Falcon Sport though. Anyway, he then spent some time with Bobby Wasabi, which is where a number of American Tornado players went. So he's kind of in that same grouping where he joined some of those American Tornado players, players like OG, False, Speedily. Those are the players who he kind of went and joined when they left American Tornado. So he has a bit of that history of being an American Tornado player. Not necessarily quite the same level. Didn't play with them specifically, but played with some of those same players and was in that general kind of level of talent. Is kind of where I would group him. There's kind of a lot of rising, Western players coming into this season. And Sturmajed is in that kind of group of these really talented Western players from these one or two Western super teams that were really, really good. He is one of those players. So I'm confident in Sturmajed's abilities. He's a very good player. But I don't really feel like this support line inspires me as much as some of these other ones do. Sturmajed I'm really interested in. I don't really feel like Animo is going to be at his best. I think Animo's best days are behind him. And now you're putting him on a mixed roster, which he's never been on before. He's never been on a mixed roster. Every roster he's been on is full Korean, right? He's on NYXL. He was on Seoul Dynasty. He's never been on a mixed roster. So I don't really know what to expect out of Animo. I don't really think his best days, like I said, are in front of him. I think he has likely played his best Overwatch already. And so to me, it just seems like the type of thing where it feels kind of like Neptuno going to the Paris Eternal last year, where it just feels like a signing of, like, it's a big name, but do I think he'll be that good in 2022? Probably not. And with the way that the game seems to be going, where it's way more aggressive, way more offensive, way more fast-paced, I don't really think that Animo's style of play is the ideal style of play for the future of the game and of the league. And so to me, it feels very much like we have moved past the point where this support line would be one that excites me a lot. So we'll see, but definitely not the most exciting line and roster to me so far at this point. What I am actually quite excited by, and the thing that makes me really honestly the most intrigued, is this tank line. For this tank line, they signed someone as their main tank who played for Team CC most recently, which Team CC has been very, very, very good in Chinese contenders and Korean contenders. But they moved to Korean contenders once the Shanghai Dragons roster became fully Korean. But also played for Gen G, another Korean roster, very, very good as well. Got second in the Gauntlet back in 2020, the Asia Gauntlet specifically. So very, very, very exciting player to me. Probably the biggest signing by this team. Him and Hydron, I think, are the most exciting signings for this Florida Mayhem roster. And I think someone really does bring a lot to this team. As a main tank player, he can play the Ryan, he can play the Winston, play the Reset. I don't know how good his Wrecking Ball is. I think that's probably his weakest point, but I don't think it's anything that will make him just, like, not good enough as a player to run. I think he's still a very good player, and I think he still is going to be an important part of this roster. I think he's probably going to play the majority of the playtime this season, because I think he is that level of player. And that, to me, is really where they went in, is getting a really solid main tank player who has been playing on really good contenders teams over the past several years. So someone who I have a lot of faith in. You pair him with Adam, who, of course, was originally supposed to be on the LA Valiant back in 2021, but then they blew up their entire roster, and so he didn't actually get the opportunity to play for that roster. So not really a surprise that he ends up with the Florida Mayhem when they are coached by Gunba, who was the coach for that Valiant team, or a coach of that Valiant team, back in the 2020 season. And so to me, this is a really big signing for them as well, and it's really nice to see Adam actually get the shot at the league that he lost out on because of the LA Valiant's kind of roster mismanagement and mishandling and their decision to remove their entire roster and fire them, basically, to move to the APAC region. And this, to me, is the most exciting part of this roster. I think both of these tank players are very exciting, very interesting players. I'm excited to see Adam finally get his chance at the Overwatch League, and I think someone is a player who has a lot to bring to the table and who I'm excited to see actually get to play, because we haven't seen him in the Overwatch League yet, and I think he is going to be a fun player to watch. I'm always excited to see tank players, especially rookie main tanks, who are successful and have come from good teams, because main tank is one of those roles that I feel like has historically been quite difficult to gauge who's really kind of among the best. And a lot of rookie main tanks have struggled. Historically, main tank was a role where it was a lot of veteran guys who really kind of dominated. Very few main tanks kind of joined the league and really like rivaled people who had not or who'd been around for a long time. But now Jester's gone, Mono's gone, Sato's gone. A lot of these guys have been around for a long time or have left the league. It's really, Fate is kind of like the guy who's been there a while. Smurf's been around a while. Those are the guys that you look at now and you say, okay, these are these players who've been around for a long time. Marvel's been around for a long time. And these guys are now going to be competing against people like Someone and people like Mag and Muse, who are newer faces, and players like Kellen who've joined the league more recently. And I'm really interested to see what happens, because main tank has always been so heavily dominated by some of these old guard. But I'm hoping that maybe we are finally going to start seeing some of these young main tank players step up and have a really big role in Overwatch 2, especially where the game is changing and the way that people have known how to play the game previously probably won't really be the same anymore. So I think these younger players who have adapted more, who have played more of these kind of newer styles, and who have, I think, more ability to adapt and change to the ever-changing landscape of the game, will perform better and will ultimately be the stronger players. So that's why I'm interested to see someone on this roster. And I'm interested to see Adam, because I don't know exactly what the meta is going to be. I don't know how much we're going to see Adam, but I hope we get to see a decent amount of him, because the way that he was, completely screwed over by the LA Valiant really sucks. And I'm hoping that he at least gets a lot of playtime this season, gets to be like a significant contributing part to this roster, because who knows what the future holds for a lot of these tank players with Overwatch 2 moving to 5v5. And so I at least want to see Adam get the shot to compete at the highest level, consistently. Those are really my thoughts on this Florida Mayhem roster. I don't really think this roster looks all that great. I think they're one of the weaker rosters in the league as a whole, not even just the Western region. I think that they just don't look like a roster that excites me all that much. I don't really know what to think. A lot of the time, these mixed roster experiments that are like predominantly Western players with like a couple of Korean players don't work. I can't really think of the most recent time that actually did work. So I don't really have a ton of high expectations for this roster. I think they look like they're going to be okay and pretty average. when a lot of the other teams around them, I think, have gotten significantly better. I don't think this new Mayhem roster has done the same thing. So I think that they definitely will be more competitive than they were last season. I think that there's more ability for them to do well. I don't think they have the same weaknesses they had last season, where I thought last season they had very clear problems with their DPS line. They didn't have the flexibility in the DPS line they needed, and stuff that I think their main tank and tank line problems last year were way more evident and prevalent than I think they'll be this year. So I think they have fixed a lot of their major issues from last season, but I think that the overall level of talent is more balanced this year, but it's not as high this year, and that's really where I feel this Mayhem roster will struggle the most. But I would love to hear from all of you, hear your thoughts on this roster. If you think this is a good roster, a bad roster, if you think they're going to be better or worse than last season, let me know in the comments down below. But that is all for me for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want more videos like this in the future, consider liking and subscribing. But I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all so much once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.